So, when you do this, you say, in 1795, the federal government, the territorial government under Sinclair, had essentially achieved what it set out to do. It had provided security for people in Kentucky and southern Ohio. It opened the floodgates to settlement, and most of the settlement of Ohio takes place after 95 because people feel like it is safe now to come and settle the river valleys, the Miami River Valley, the Scioto River Valley, the Muskingum River Valley, and so on. So check this for the national government. This was probably the most important achievement of the national government. Now, if you're looking at it from the perspective of American Indians, which you did yesterday, I hope, and which we would do if we had more time, it's a disaster. But from the perspective of the government of the United States and the men who wrote the Northwest Ordinance, this is critical. Because what this does is to say this government is legitimate. It's worth supporting. Okay. If people want protection from Indians, the second thing they really want badly is to be able to get around. Not only get around, but take things to market, ship things. Be able, if they're going to grow corn or whatever it is they're going to grow, they want to be able to make sure that they can get it someplace to sell it. Their expectation in the 1790s is that government should be responsible for doing this. Now, one of the ways to do this is through roads. Another way to do it is by improving rivers. But there are also things like ferries, bridges, and other kinds of things that need to be built, what we would call infrastructure. How is that going to be accomplished? In the 1790s, there is no steam power, so the best market is in New Orleans, which means that what you would do would be to load up a flatboat, a cheap flatboat, with all the products you could get, mainly things like corn. Corn was hard to transport, so it was easier to feed it to hogs. And the hogs tended to take care of themselves, didn't require much tending. So the hogs eat all the corn. Then the hogs are great. They walk to market. And then when you get them to a market town, you slaughter them. The other great thing about hogs was that there was nothing about the hog that was wasted. Not only was there food, but the skin became leather. The fat was rendered into tallow, used for candles, soap, all kinds of things. Even the bristles were used to make brushes. No coincidence that Cincinnati is called Porkopolis, because Cincinnati grows because all these hogs are fed the corn, marched into Cincinnati where they are slaughtered. And of course, no coincidence too that the major industry or corporation in Cincinnati by the end of the 20th century is soap making, Procter & Gamble, because of the products used from pigs. Nothing was wasted. All right, question was then, if you're going to be able to grow stuff and market it, who's going to pay for all these roads, canals, ferries, and everything else? In the 1790s, the government of the United States doesn't do very much, accomplish very much in this way at all. It frustrates people who are moving into the territory because they can't get around. This is not a check mark for the federal government. In fact, this is a serious problem. We can't really enjoy living in the Ohio country until we can get things to market. When's that going to happen? Now, after Ohio's created as a state, what happens is that state and local governments, not national government, take responsibility for building roads, ferries, bridges, and canals. That works for a while, and then in the 1830s and 1840s, they shift to private corporations. So the railroads, which become the big transportation network that encourage people to get to market and everything, are actually private companies, not done by government at all. The idea being that government just didn't do it very well. All right, the third one is also a loss for the federal government, education. Remember I said before the break that these guys considered education critical to training good citizens and making them into good people? Well, what they did, education became the issue, and this will sound very familiar to you, those of you who are teachers today. Education became the critical symbolic issue and cultural issue as well as a technical issue in the 1790s and the early part of the 19th century. Everybody said we want education. Everybody agreed. You wouldn't find anybody going around Ohio in the 1790s, early 1800s saying, we don't want education. No. But how? What kind? And who paid for it? Same questions we still deal with in the 21st century were critically important. Should schools teach certain values? Should churches be involved in education? Should certain kinds of people with ethnic backgrounds have certain kinds of say? In other words, what you get is a classic struggle between people who want their kids to grow up with their values and their ways of thinking. They don't want some intellectual coming in and filling their kids' heads with all kinds of strange ideas. Classic pattern was most of the immigrants into Ohio are from the South. Most of the school teachers were Yankees from New England. You don't want these Yankee Presbyterian Congregationalists coming in teaching kids who are Baptists and Methodists. And so there's a kind of tension there saying, hey, wait a minute. If we're going to have education, education should be about replicating the values of our family and our community. It should not be about expanding our kids' minds and giving them different kinds of ideas. Still a classic battle in America in general in the 21st century. They couldn't get out of this. The second thing was taxes. Everybody says education is a great thing, but nobody wants to pay for it, then or now. And so the problem was, how did you get people voluntarily to sacrifice the income that was necessary to support the schools? The federal government, the territorial government can't come up with a solution to this. So what they start are private schools or academies where parents paid essentially to send their kids to school. But this defeated the purpose of a Republican society because it just encouraged an elite, a group of people who simply had more advantages and privileges and talents than other people, and that wouldn't work. The new state of Ohio will have to argue about this for the next 2.5 centuries. Still hasn't figured it out, essentially. How do you pay for it? 1825 is when Ohio passes its first tax to support a state-supported school system. The kind of education that you guys have, public schools, grades and everything, doesn't come about until the 1850s. It takes a long, long time. And these two issues, local control, who's going to be in charge? Are the local families, the parents, going to be able to hire and fire teachers, decide what's taught in their schools, what they're reading, what they're learning? Or is some kind of professional official person in Columbus or D.C. going to decide that? And the other question is taxes. We want taxes, we want schools, but we don't want to have to pay for it. Or if we want to pay for it, what we want to do is pay the local school teacher by giving him a ham rather than paying him, a salary. Or allowing him to, rent a room in our house or something like that, rather than actually paying him a salary. So what you have by the early 1800s then is, as Ohio, what becomes Ohio, is filling with people. The federal government has proved its value here. It has also established basic counties and towns and things like that, but it has proved a dismal failure in terms of improvement, and it has done virtually nothing with regard to education. Now, last point. The last big thing that happens is that in the late 1790s then, as the federal government, the territorial government attempts to implement this vision of a controlled development, there's a lot of resentment of it. You guys have lived in your own life with the, not so much in your life, but in my life, the rise and expansion of a conservative populist movement in the United States against government interference in people's lives, high taxes, get out of our way, let us do what we want to do. That's nothing new, and that's a critical part of American popular culture and politics, and has been from the very beginning. And certainly it was true in Ohio in the 1790s and early 1800s. What you get is people coming in to live in the Northwest Territory in the 1790s, particularly after Greenville, and they don't like the fact that they have this governor and these judges who are making laws, establishing towns, telling them how to behave, saying we have to behave with the utmost good faith toward the Indians. You can't molest people if they're behaving properly in terms of their religion. They don't like all this. They think that power ought to be with them in their local hometown, their local family. And the leader of this movement is a Virginian by the name of Thomas Worthington. Worthington is a young man, born in 1770. He was only, roughly 30 years old when he comes to Ohio. He's a Quaker, but he tends to worship a lot with Methodists, who were considered to be enthusiastic people, not peaceable all the time. His brother-in-law, Edward Tiffin, the first governor of Ohio, is a Methodist preacher himself. And these men, Tiffin, Worthington, and literally hundreds of them all over the state, not just in Chillicothe but elsewhere, many of them from the South, many of them trying to replicate, as you see at Adena, a kind of Southern Virginia plantation kind of house here. What they're trying to do is to say, what we want is not government that acts on the national level or the territorial level. We want power in our hands. We want to run our own little local area.